Hello, my name is Jara Summerford and I'm president of the Tennessee Education Association. The State Board of Education is scheduled to vote this week on policy changes for new standards and teacher licensure. For many teachers, the new standards will mean that maintaining their license will depend solely upon their TVAS scores. Numerous TEA members have shared inconsistencies with their TVAS data, and we are seeing that TVAS scores are not necessarily stable from year to year for a given teacher. The new license proposal presents several issues for TEA members, such as dual standards for those with or without individual TVAS scores, and removal of professional growth requirements. We also have some questions about non-classroom educators, teachers in non-classroom settings, and administrators, and what will the licensure requirements look like for those individuals. But above all, our opposition to this new policy change centers around the use of TVAS scores. While TEA supports the use of student outcomes as one component in multiple measures for teacher evaluation, tying license renewal directly to TVAS scores is not an appropriate use of that data, and we challenge the idea that a teacher's score in a given year is a valid indicator of their future performance. The following presentation is shared by TEA General Counsel Rick Colbert. I hope you find it informative and useful.
We are here today to talk about TVAS in the context of teacher licensure decisions. On August 16, the Commissioner will present to the State Board of Education a proposal to revamp how teacher licensure decisions are made. The Commissioner has labeled his proposal Redesigning the Pathway to Teaching. In this proposal, the Commissioner recommends using TVAS results as a make-or-break component of teacher license advancement and renewal. The decision about whether a teacher's career continues or ends will be based on a snapshot of her TVAS results on the date of renewal. The Commissioner's proposal represents an inappropriate use of TVAS results. First, we have to understand something about TVAS. TVAS has been around since 1992. It was put in place in Tennessee law as a part of the Education Improvement Act of 1992. TVAS is a complex statistical method of attempting to analyze student performance and school and teacher effects on that performance. Unfortunately, the complexity of TVAS can sometimes lead to uncritical acceptance of it in uses like the one the Commissioner has proposed here, for which it is not well suited. The data from student TCAP scores in grades 3 through 8 and some end-of-course tests in a few high school classes is provided to the SAS Institute in North Carolina. That data is then input into a computer program that uses something called multivariate longitudinal data structures to convert the data into measures of the influence of educational entities on academic progress of populations of students. William Sanders and Sandra Horn, who has worked closely with him, have explained it this way. The Tennessee Value-Added Assessment System is a statistical method of determining the effectiveness of school systems, schools, and teachers. TVAS uses statistical mixed model theory and methodology to enable a multivariate longitudinal analysis of student achievement data. Dr. Sanders and Ms. Horn go on to explain how TVAS works, and this is what they say. And as they point out, by following the growth over time, the child serves as his or her own control. Now that's a very important statement because it's important to note here what it is that TVAS is attempting to do. TVAS attempts to separate teacher effects from all the other multitude of things that might affect student performance. But we don't have tests or measures for all of those other things. So what we do is take student test score history over a period of years, and from that history we try to predict expected student test performance. The difference between that prediction and the student's actual performance is regarded as the teacher's value-added estimate. This is the statistical formula that the people at SAS will provide to explain what they do. For statisticians, this, I'm sure, makes sense. For the average teacher, it probably does not. And this is an example of how TVAS works that SAS will provide. And again, for statisticians, it makes sense. But for the average classroom teacher, it would be very difficult to understand. This is what the Tennessee General Assembly says about TVAS. It's a statistical system for educational outcome assessment that uses measures of student learning to enable estimation of teacher, school, and school district statistical distributions. The key point to remember throughout this discussion is the term estimation. TVAS provides an estimate, not an absolute measure of a teacher's effectiveness. Or as Susan Horn has said, TVAS provides an estimate of the truth. In the First to the Top Act, the legislature, in apparent recognition of the inherent shortcomings of relying on estimates alone for high-stakes employment decisions, divided up the evaluation of teachers into basically two components. You have the observation component, which is primarily the on-site evaluations that principals do using an established rubric that they are trained to administer. And then you have student achievement data. The student achievement data is broken down into two components of its own. 35% of that half of the evaluation is student growth data represented by TVAS, with 15% being other measures of student achievement. In other words, the legislature has decided that TVAS results should only account for about a third of a teacher's overall evaluation. Of course, the majority of our teachers don't even have their own TVAS results because they don't teach a tested grade or subject. For them, the TVAS results are school-wide results, and sometimes they are even from a school other than the one where the teacher is employed. In the most recent legislative session, the legislature apparently realized the unfairness of having those results count for even a third of a teacher's evaluation and reduced the percentage that TVAS would play for those teachers to a fourth. Now, why does all this matter? Because under the Tennessee Constitution, it's the legislature that has the responsibility for deciding what Tennessee's public education system will look like. It's not an executive branch decision. It is a legislative decision. And our legislature has spoken on how much weight TVAS should have in evaluating a teacher's work. 35% for those with their own results, 25% for everyone else. The commissioner has proposed something different for licensure. He says in his presentation that the purpose of licensure is different than the purpose of evaluation. But in his proposal, he proposes that advancement or renewal of a license will depend directly upon evaluation results. It will require overall evaluation scores of 2 or better for 3 years, and it will require a TVAS score of 2 or better for 2 of 3 years. Unless you're one of those teachers that don't have your own TVAS scores, and then only the overall evaluation results will matter. For the Commissioner's proposal, the decision on licensure will be wholly dependent on a teacher's TVAS scores. 100%, in other words, 100% will be how much difference TVAS scores make in the determination of whether a teacher, a veteran teacher, has her license renewed. In case there's any doubt about the Commissioner's intent to make TVAS a 100% make or break factor in license renewal, one need look only at the Commissioner's own presentation for his plan in action. In that presentation, he gives us a Ms. Williams, a Mr. Smith, and a Ms. Jones who all are dealing with license renewal. And Ms. Jones is the example he gives us of the teacher whose license does not get renewed. Note that in his example, Ms. Jones in her last 3 years of teaching has 3s on her overall evaluations. That means overall she's evaluated as meeting expectations. But because of TVAS scores alone, Ms. Jones sees her career come to an end. What is the explanation for bringing an end to the career of a teacher based on TVAS scores, even though her principal believes she is doing a good job as a teacher? The Commissioner's explanation is that TVAS is a strong predictor of future performance, and that after the early years, teacher impact on student growth remains relatively stable. Respectfully, these assertions are simply not true. They assume a level of precision in TVAS results that simply does not exist. Cynthia Watson is a Tennessee teacher. She's been teaching in the public schools since 1996, so she is a veteran teacher. She teaches the same subject every year, 7th grade science. She's regarded by her peers and her supervisors in the Weakley County school system as a good teacher. She has her own TVAS results. According to the Commissioner, since she's a veteran teacher, those results should remain relatively stable and should be a strong predictor of her future performance. What you are looking at here is a composite of the results sections of her 2010, 2011, and 2012 individual TVAS reports. Let's focus on them individually. And as you look at this, remember the Commissioner's assertion that after the first few years of teaching, a teacher's effect on student growth remains relatively stable. In 2008, Ms. Watson was regarded as a level 5 teacher according to her TVAS reports. That means she was among the very best of teachers throughout Tennessee. In 2009, she was regarded as a level 1 teacher, among the worst of the worst. In 2010, she's a level 4 teacher, exceeding expectations. When her 2011 report came, she was a level 5 teacher again, among the very best teachers around. And when she received her 2012 report, she found herself going from level 5 all the way to the bottom of the barrel at level 1 again. Here's a summary of Ms. Watson's TVAS results. level 5, level 1, level 4, level 5, and level 1. Now, interestingly enough, this wide discrepancy in her TVAS results is not what brought Ms. Watson to TEA for assistance. What brought her seeking assistance was the fact that even after she received a report putting her at a certain level, that level would change in subsequent reports. Here is Ms. Watson's 2010 TVAS report, and as you can see, in 2010 she had an estimate of 1.3, which made her a level 4 teacher according to TVAS. In her 2011 report, the 2010 estimate dropped from 1.3 to 0.8, and her level dropped from level 4 to level 3. This is what actually caused Ms. Watson to start questioning what was happening in her TVAS reports. She didn't know it at the time that she began questioning, because she hadn't received her 2012 report yet when her questions began. But when she did receive it, she found that her 2010 estimate had dropped another half point to 0.3, still at a level 3, but in essence her estimate dropped a full point over the course of 2 years from 2010 to 2012. So she began asking questions at the local level to try to understand why this was happening to her 2010 estimate. The first answer that she got came from Teresa McClure at SAS. And Ms. McClure acknowledged that there may be some measurement error in TVAS scores, and that those scores get recalculated, and sometimes they go up a little and sometimes they drop a little, and depending on where the score is, the effectiveness level may change. As Ms. McClure pointed out, the scores are estimates of the teacher's effectiveness. One of Ms. Watson's supervisors in the Weakley County school system had a telephone conversation with Ms. McClure, and Ms. McClure, according to that supervisor, said this: "There is not a way to print out the statistical process for your teacher's calculation. All the data is entered into the computer, and the computer runs the calculations. The outcome is what it is." Of course, that sort of response bodes poorly for a teacher who wishes to use the limited grievance procedure that's available to challenge the accuracy of the data on which her evaluation scores are based. But that's an issue for another day. With little to go on from SAS, Ms. Watson came to TEA seeking some assistance. And we contacted Zach Rossley, who is the Deputy Assistant Commissioner for Data and Research at the Tennessee Department of Education, and is apparently the department's leading expert on TVAS. And this is what Mr. Rossley had to say to explain the dilemma that Ms. Watson found herself in with her 2010 TVAS score ever changing. Mr. Rossley said that as a starting point, we always want to emphasize that teacher effect scores are estimates. He acknowledged that measurement error exists in test scores. He acknowledged that standard error was present to address the fact that there is some uncertainty in the estimates. He explained that the estimates are recalculated each year using a rolling 5-year set of data, and that because of that recalculation, it's possible for the estimate to change from one year to the next. And he even pointed out that as these recalculations occur, there are recalculations that involve the scores of all students, not just scores exclusive to Ms. Watson's students, that can affect Ms. Watson's estimate. Some additional research actually verified what Mr. Rossley told us about the estimated nature of the results. Back in the mid-1990s, when TVAS was still relatively new, there was a primer that was issued for teachers and principals to help them understand TVAS. It was called Using and Interpreting Tennessee's Value-Added Assessment System. The authors were Samuel Bratton from the Knox County Schools and Sandra Horn and Paul Wright, both from the Value Added Research and Assessment Center at the University of Tennessee, where TVAS had its origins. And in the primer, the authors pointed out that TVAS scores, like all statistics, are estimates. They aren't the truth, they are estimates of the truth. And the real thing exists in theory only. In that primer, it was said that if one can begin to think of test scores as estimates, then one can begin to accept the notion that last year's estimates can be legitimately revised when this year's scores become available. The new information makes it possible to calculate a better estimate of last year's truth as well as this year's truth. Because TVAS provides estimates, it must also account for the possibility that the estimates could be wrong. And that's why standard error is listed on a teacher's TVAS report. The estimate is divided by the standard error to produce the index, which is the score on which the performance level is based. But that math doesn't really explain the importance of standard error. To truly understand the importance of standard error, we can look back at the primer. The primer explains that standard error is a way to show how good an estimate is, how much confidence we can have in the accuracy of that estimate. In other words, standard error accounts for the statistical reality that the error, that the estimate just may be wrong. According to the primer, if standard errors of estimates are not taken into account, it is very easy to overreact to differences among reported gains and percentages. How do we take standard error into account? The primer says that if you add and subtract a standard error from the score with which it is associated, you create a confidence band that brackets your estimate. And the confidence band gives you the wiggle room to account for deviations from the estimate due to measurement error. In other words, you can be confident that the true score falls somewhere in that confidence band. Let's look back at Ms. Watson. According to the 2010 report, her estimate was a 1.3 and the standard error was a 1.3. According to the 2011 report, her 2010 estimate was recalculated at 0.8 with a 1.2 standard error. And in the 2012 report, her 2010 estimate was recalculated once again at a 0.3 with a 1.2 standard error. That means the confidence bands for these estimates look like this. In the 2010 report, her 2010 estimate falls in a confidence band of something between 0.0 and 2.6. We can be confident that her real score should be somewhere in that band. And again, in 2011 and 2012, you can see these bands that cover about 2.5 points, the confidence band. And that's because the standard error is about 1.25 points on each one of the reports. And so you go 1.25 points in each direction from the estimate to get the band. The confidence band means that we can be confident, according to the 2010 report, that Ms. Watson was somewhere between a level 3 and a level 5 teacher. And we can be confident, according to the 2011 report, that in 2010 she was somewhere between a level 3 and a level 5 teacher. And according to the recalculation in 2012, we can be confident that she was somewhere between a level 3 and a level 4 teacher. But that's all the confidence we can have about where Ms. Watson fell when we account for standard error. So where does that leave us? It means that TVAS scores are not nearly as stable or reliable as suggested, either as a measure of current performance or as a predictor of future performance. If they were, a veteran teacher like Ms. Watson wouldn't have scores that are all over the possible range and that fluctuate so wildly from one year to the next. Veteran teachers don't go from being great to terrible to great and back to terrible from one year to the next. It means that reliance on a snapshot of a teacher's TVAS estimate at a given point in time, the point when it's time to renew her license, is simply wrong, because that estimate may change substantially when it's recalculated using new data. The level 1 you are seeing today when you're making a license renewal decision may be a level 2 or even a level 3 when it's recalculated next year, particularly when you take into account standard error, which may mean it's a level 2 or a level 3 even as you see it now. To summarize, the Commissioner has presented a licensure proposal to make teacher career decisions based on TVAS scores that are estimates, that fluctuate wildly from year to year, that are subject to change after they may have been relied on for these licensure decisions, that may change based on the performance of students that are not just the teacher's own students, that may change based on student performance long after students have left the teacher's class, and that are subject to error that is being disregarded when the proposed licensure decisions are made. In 2003, the RAND Corporation published a study of value-added methodology like TVAS. And in the conclusion of that lengthy study, the report said, the research base is currently insufficient for us to recommend the use of VAM, value-added methodology, for high-stakes decisions. They spoke of biases that aren't accounted for and uncertainty that's not accounted for. They spoke of variability due to sampling error, and they spoke of a number of factors that can affect error and that the error could be relatively large. TVAS may have valid uses in the overall process of evaluating teachers and evaluating schools and evaluating school systems and evaluating the effectiveness of our delivery of public education. But its use as a make or break component of licensure decisions assumes a level of accuracy, precision, and reliability that these estimates simply do not possess.